Chapter 3, Our Program. The 12 Steps of SAA. Attending SAA meetings starts us on a new way of life. But while the SAA fellowship supports our recovery, the actual work of recovery is described in the 12 steps. Meetings are forums for learning how to integrate the steps into our lives. Working the 12 steps leads to a spiritual transformation that results in sustainable relief from our addiction. When we start attending meetings of Sex Addicts Anonymous, many of us are surprised to meet people who are enjoying life and experiencing freedom from the painful, compulsive behaviors that had brought them to SAA. Listening to other members share about their recovery, we gradually realize that in order to make the same kind of progress, we need to be willing to do whatever it takes to get sexually abstinent and to stay abstinent. We have learned from hard experience that we cannot achieve and maintain abstinence if we aren't willing to change our way of life. But if we can honestly face our problems and are willing to change, the 12 steps of SAA will lead to an awakening that allows us to live a new way of life according to spiritual principles. Taking these steps allows fundamental change to occur in our lives. They are the foundation of our recovery. The 12 Steps of Sex Addicts Anonymous. 1. We admitted we were powerless over addictive sexual behavior, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7. Humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to other sex addicts and to practice these principles in our lives. These steps are the heart of our program. They contain a depth that we could hardly have guessed when we started. Over time, we establish a relationship with a power greater than ourselves, each of us coming to an understanding of a higher power that is personal for us. Although the steps use the word God to indicate this power, SAA is not affiliated with any religion, creed, or dogma. The program offers a spiritual solution to our addiction, without requiring adherence to any specific set of beliefs or practices. The path is wide enough for anyone who wishes to walk it. There is no one correct or SAA-sanctioned way to complete the 12 steps. Most of us learned how to work the steps from our sponsors. Many of us have also gained insight from books or adapted methods from other 12-step programs. In this book, we suggest ideas for how to work each step, based on approaches that have worked for many of us. Each step represents a significant action, with each action linked to the other steps, in a process that establishes our new life of recovery on spiritual principles. The steps are numbered because they are meant to chart the course of our spiritual progress. We work the steps in order, as each step creates a foundation for the steps that follow. The actions of the steps often involve the completion of specific tasks, such as writing lists that require an honest examination of ourselves and our way of life. Each action also takes place within us, as we gradually let go of old ways of thinking and establish conscious contact with our higher power. No step is done well in isolation. We work the steps with someone who understands our problem and cares about our recovery, preferably a sponsor. A sponsor will help us prepare for each step, give us guidance and suggestions, and listen to us as we share the experiences and insights we gain. But the steps are more than a series of exercises. They provide basic principles for living. Most of us find opportunities on a daily basis to apply one or more of the steps to some challenge in our life. Over time, the spiritual principles and the steps become integrated into our thoughts, feelings, and behavior. We find that we are not only working the steps, we are living them. Step 1. We admitted we were powerless over addictive sexual behavior, that our lives had become unmanageable. In our addiction, we held on to the belief that we were in control of our sexual behavior and could successfully manage our lives. This kept many of us from seeing that we even had a problem. We told ourselves that if we had tried harder, we could have stopped, but our experience has shown otherwise. No matter how many promises or resolutions we made, no matter how strong our efforts and our determination, the behaviors eventually returned, along with their painful consequences. Only when we admitted our powerlessness over these behaviors and our inability to manage our own lives are we able to begin walking a path of recovery. In taking the first step, we admit that our addiction is destroying us and that we are unable to stop it. We surrender, raise the white flag, and accept that the battle is over. The principle behind this admission is honesty. For many of us, the first crack in our denial comes with hitting bottom and the despair of facing an unbearable situation. The next breakthrough occurs when we are honest enough to take the first step, acknowledging that we are powerless over the behavior that brought us to this point, and that our lives are in shambles. We make this admission without excuses or rationalizations. With the first step, we stop lying to ourselves. As long as we can be honest, even a little bit, we can move forward in our recovery. Honesty is the foundation on which all further progress is based. We start by admitting that we are completely powerless to stop our addictive behaviors on our own. We admit that our lives are out of our control. This is enough for our recovery to begin. Admitting that our willpower is insufficient allows us to be open to new ways of thinking and living. As long as we retain a belief in self-control as a remedy for our addiction, we will continue to fail. With this step, we recognize that we have a disease, not a mere weakness or character flaw, and that we are powerless to change this fact. We honestly admit that we don't have all the answers and that we need help. When we admit our powerlessness, we start letting go of control and become more open to receiving the help we so desperately need. Admitting that our lives had become unmanageable allows us to honestly examine the painful consequences of our sexual behavior, consequences that affected every aspect of our existence. It is difficult to accept that we are unable to manage our lives, and even more difficult to admit this to others. But our experience has shown that we have no choice but to surrender, or else return to acting out and all that follows from it. Many of us have found it helpful to examine our sexual behavior in detail when working this step. Some of us write a history of our sexual addiction from as far back as we can remember up to the present, trying to leave nothing out. Looking at our own story helps us to see how we were powerless over our addiction. In writing a first step, We list examples of our powerlessness, including the progression of our acting out behaviors, actions that violated our own values, efforts we made to stop, and occasions where we knew that these behaviors would lead to serious consequences, yet we did them anyway. In a written first step, we also list the ways that sex addiction made our lives unmanageable. If we spent money on our addiction, we can try to estimate how much money we spent. If we spent time, we can consider how many hours we spent, including the time we spent in fantasy or obsession. If we took the risk of arrest, violence, or disease, we can examine each specific risk we took. We also write about the specific ways our behaviors affected our physical and mental health, our work, the lives of those we love, and any other consequences, internal or external, that we experienced. Our disease left us with little time, energy, or money for anything else. Our fantasies and obsessions distracted us from the things we needed to do. We often neglected our responsibilities and put off doing things that we didn't want to face. Many of us had a number of simultaneous problems. We had relationships that needed mending, we had financial crises, and we sometimes faced legal problems. The consequences to our inner life were just as serious. Addictive sexual behavior increased our loneliness and insecurity, damaged our self-worth, estranged us from our spiritual nature, and often resulted in emotional trauma. All of these consequences add up to an unmanageable life. In listing examples of powerlessness and unmanageability, we include specific details, which helps us to recall the thoughts and feelings we had at the time and makes the reality of our sexual addiction more and more evident to us. Although we work this step the best we can, more may be revealed later in our recovery. The important thing is to work the first step now, to the best of our ability, in the knowledge that we can always work it again when we need to. We get help from someone in the program, usually our sponsor, to work the first step. We need support while facing our addiction. A sponsor can also help us face those parts of our disease about which we are in denial. We may think, for example, that the risks we took were not that dangerous, or that the consequences were not that severe. Our sponsor can help us see more honestly and clearly what our situation was really like. If we choose to do a written first step, we usually share what we have written with our sponsor. For many of us, this is the first time we've told the whole truth about our addiction to another person. In some SAA groups, members share their first step at a meeting. With help from our sponsor and others in the group, we select the most important parts of our story to tell. These include the most significant examples of our powerlessness and the worst moments of our unmanageability, no matter how much shame we may feel about them. We also share critical points in our addiction story, illustrating the progression of our disease. We tell how we finally sought help and what it has been like to recognize our powerlessness and unmanageability. Our sponsor can also help us decide beforehand whether certain details of our story are too intense to be shared with the group. The group needs to make sure that we are supported before and after a step presentation. Sharing our story in a group can bring up intense feelings. We feel very vulnerable. But it can also help break the bonds of shame and isolation, deepen the process of healing, and increase our commitment to recovery. Sharing a first step in a group creates an opportunity to connect with other members. We allow ourselves to be known when we take this risk. And when we hear others share their first step with us, we are reminded of similar aspects of our own addiction. Experiencing the common bond of our powerlessness promotes the healing of every member. Each of us chooses to work this step in the way that is most effective and meaningful for us. Not everyone works step 1 in written form. What is important is that we get honest about our addiction and let go of the idea of controlling our behavior with our willpower or managing our lives without help. We cannot change the fact that we have an illness. By practicing rigorous honesty and giving up the dream of overcoming our addiction by ourselves, we become open to the spiritual solution offered by the 12 steps. We also begin to learn how to ask for and receive help from other recovering sex addicts. Asking for help releases us from the toxic isolation that drives our addiction. As we receive help, we learn to let the walls down and to accept nurturing and care from others. Learning to be vulnerable, admitting that we don't have all the answers, and asking for and receiving help are all essential to our recovery. As we fully admit our dilemma and our inability to find a way out, we find that we are now ready to hear the solution. We are ready for step 2. Step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. When we accept that our way doesn't work, step 2 opens the door to a new way that does. In the first step, we admitted that our addiction was going to destroy us if we did not stop, and that we could not stop on our own. We discovered that our addiction was a problem too big for us to solve by ourselves. Without some power greater than ourselves to assist us, our situation is hopeless. In the second step, we are presented with the possibility that this power can restore us to basic sanity and well-being. Step 2 offers hope that sanity is possible, and at the same time, it implies that, in our addiction, we were insane. Our insanity manifested in many ways. We would put our addiction first and everything else second. We may have placed ourselves in dangerous situations or taken terrible risks. And the more we denied our addiction and its consequences, the less we were in touch with reality. To be restored to sanity is to rediscover the spiritual nature we have always had, but which was hidden by the insanity of our disease. Belief in a higher power can be difficult for many of us in SAA who come to the program with a faith that was damaged in one way or another, or those of us who never had any spiritual beliefs at all. Some of us came from strict, judgmental religious backgrounds that reinforced our fear and shame. Some of us attempted to find refuge from our addiction in religion. Yet after making great commitments and efforts in our religious practice, we found little lasting relief from our disease. Others never took up a religion or tried a few and found them unsatisfactory. Many of us didn't believe in God or were uncertain as to what spiritual beliefs we were willing to accept, if any. Whether we are atheists, agnostics, or those with strong religious convictions, we may find ourselves having reservations about the spirituality needed to work step 2. We may be so used to self-reliance as the only way of functioning in the world that we resist the notion of any power greater than ourselves. We can start to open ourselves to this idea by considering the forces that are clearly more powerful than we are, such as nature, society, or even our addiction. When we recognize that our own power is limited, we can more readily acknowledge the possibility of a higher power. For some of us, almost everything seems more powerful than we were, but in a negative way, oppressing us and preventing us from being happy or free. In contrast to this negative belief, working the second step allows us to accept the possibility of a power that can free us from the bondage of our disease and restore us to a life of sanity and fulfillment. To work this step, we only need to be open-minded enough to try something new. For most of us, coming to believe is a gradual process. We don't need to believe in any particular concept of a higher power in order to begin. We learn from others what works and doesn't work for them. We listen and we try out new approaches. If we are teachable, we can discover the stirrings of hope within us and come to a belief in the possibility of recovery from our sexual addiction. For many of us, this starts with simply coming to meetings. We experience the group as a power greater than ourselves that cares. The example of those who are living in recovery, free from their sexually addictive behaviors, shows us the power of the program. We can rely on the love and support of our friends in the group. We develop a willingness to try some of the group's suggestions, even those outside of our usual comfort zone, when we observe the practical effects of these ideas in action. From this simple beginning, belief in a higher power can grow. In time, most of us also come to believe in a spiritual power that transcends our human willpower and thinking, and that this power can return us to a condition of serenity and sanity. The steps use the word God to indicate this power. Nevertheless, the program is not aligned with any religion, nor do we adhere to any particular beliefs concerning the word God, leaving this matter up to the understanding of each member. We are free to use a different word in our spiritual practice, if that's what works for us. What is important is that we rely on a spiritual reality, or higher power, rather than on words. In essence, our shared experience of this power is one of loving and caring. We don't have to be religious to accept this idea or to ask this loving power to help us in our recovery. One of the aspects of coming to believe in a higher power is finding out what spiritual concepts make sense to us. We need to be willing to set aside old ideas and prejudices, try new solutions to old problems, and listen to the spiritual experiences and ideas of others in the fellowship. What works for others may not be an exact fit for us. But if we are patient and open-minded, we will discover an understanding of a higher power that is unique to us and that we are comfortable with. Ultimately, the specifics of our belief are not as important as faith. We can build our spirituality on the faith that our higher power can relieve us of our addiction. Some of us have found it helpful to explore our past beliefs concerning God or religion in order to gain clarity about old ideas and assumptions that may be blocking us now. Sharing these thoughts with our sponsor or others in recovery may help us to understand our past spiritual beliefs and to be open to new ones that are healthier for us. Our concepts of a higher power may change and evolve over time. As we grow in recovery, our spiritual awareness grows, and in time we discover that our faith grows not so much from a set of abstract beliefs, but from daily practical experiences of recovery and healing, as observed in others and in ourselves. We can cultivate this awareness by drawing near to those members who demonstrate significant recovery from those behaviors we've struggled with the most, and whose practical faith attracts us. The key to step 2 is not just believing in a higher power, but believing that this power can and will restore us to sanity. Many of us thought that recovery might work for others, but not for us. We thought that our problems were different, that our situation was unique. We had become so used to defeat and despair that we lost touch with hope. In early recovery, many of us had our first experience of hope through the group. In the words of other members and in their eyes, we saw that recovery was possible. All we needed to do was concede that if it was possible for others, it was possible for us too. If we find it difficult to believe, we can act as if we believe. The willingness to act as if helps us to make a commitment to recovery, despite any doubts we may have. By committing to recovery, we give ourselves time to let the program work in our lives, with our understanding growing gradually along with us. We find that acting as if is more than just wishful thinking. In the process, we discover that a willingness to accept new ways of behavior leads to a clearer understanding of who we are and how spiritual principles work. When we have come to believe that we can be restored to sanity, we have stepped out of the problem and become aware of the solution. Without needing to completely understand our higher power, we can accept and use this power in order to find freedom from our addiction. Our belief that recovery is possible gives us the strength to take action. We are ready for step 3. Step 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. The third step is a turning point. In taking this step, we find the willingness to allow a God of our understanding to work in our lives. Having accepted both the reality of our disease and the possibility that a higher power can help us where our own efforts have failed, we make a leap of faith, turning to that power for assistance. Our understanding of this power does not need to be perfect or complete in order for us to take the step. We need only an open mind and a willingness to try something new. Taking the third step means acting on our belief that a higher power can relieve our addiction and restore us to sanity. We loosen the grip on our old destructive patterns, perhaps not knowing yet what will replace them, but in the faith that something better will be revealed. When we surrender our old way of living to a power greater than ourselves, we don't always know where we're going, but we can be sure that it will be better than where we were. When we first encounter this step, we may have many questions and doubts. What does it mean to turn over our will in our lives? We can think of our will as our plans and intentions, what we want to do with our lives. We can think of our lives as the carrying out of our intentions, the full scope of everything we actually do, think, and say. We turn our will and our lives over to the care of God because our self-directed thoughts and actions have so often led us to acting out negative consequences and despair. Step 3, we let a power greater than ourselves help guide our daily decisions, opening ourselves to the possibility that we may not know what is best for us, and letting go of the belief in our own power to manage our lives. In so doing, we find that God's care applies not only to becoming abstinent from addictive sexual behaviors, but to the entire course of our daily lives and to every aspect of our existence. How can we accomplish this turning over? We may be afraid of taking this step. It may even seem impossible to surrender control and allow a caring higher power to direct our lives. But it is helpful to remember that all we are doing is making a decision to turn our will and lives over. At this point in our program, we are simply willing to move forward. We decide to make a commitment to recovery and to our spiritual growth. For most of us, the actual turning over of our will and lives to the care of God will take place gradually through working the remaining 9 steps. The third step invites us to turn our will and lives over to the care of God, not the control of God. We are not abandoning ourselves to the direction of some powerful taskmaster, forcing us to do things that are not of our own choosing. Instead, we become open to making new choices for ourselves in the light of a higher power's transforming love and care. Turning our lives over to the care of God of our understanding offers a way of gentleness and compassion. We do not have to obsess about the past or worry about the future. We can turn our attention to the present, where we really live, and become open to new solutions. We are free to make different choices, gradually learning to care for ourselves as our higher power cares for us. Taking this step, we become willing to walk through all experiences and emotions, including painful and difficult ones. We discover that turning our lives over is not the end of our problems, but a way of seeing our difficulties in a new light. With a developing sense of trust that solutions are possible. In this step, we turn our will and lives over to the care of God as we understand God. This means that we each have the opportunity to develop our own understanding of God and the right to grow and recover in ways that match this understanding. No member or group can impose a belief about our higher power on us. We are free to develop our relationship with this power in whatever ways work best for us, and at our own pace. Our concept of God and spirituality may also change over time, and as our life in recovery progresses. This freedom of understanding has opened the door to spirituality for many of us who thought we would not, or could not, be spiritual. With small but significant actions, we can work step 3 by establishing a commitment to the program. For example, many of us decide to make going to meetings a priority and schedule them into our lives regardless of circumstances. We commit to attending, whether or not we feel like going. We come to believe that it is God's will that we not act out. In this way, we give up debating about how to handle our addiction and simply do what is right according to our program. We work the 3rd step whenever we choose recovery over addiction. At this point, we may also begin to practice opening ourselves up to the guidance of a higher power. For many of us, these are our first rudimentary attempts at prayer. We may ask for our higher power's help in staying abstinent today and working our program of recovery. We may ask for insight into how we can be of use to others and carry out God's will. Our specific words are less important than our willingness to make contact with a power greater than ourselves and to let God's care into our lives. To make the 3rd step decision is to surrender. We give up the belief that our intellect, our knowledge, our judgment, and our will could successfully guide our lives. We accept that control we thought we had over our lives was an illusion. This profound surrender of old beliefs, habits, and behaviors is something we learn to renew every day. We reaffirm our decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of the God of our understanding, not seeking an unattainable perfection, but acknowledging and affirming the progress we make in recovery. With surrender, we say goodbye to our old way of life and prepare to make a transition to the new. Letting go of our addiction can be like losing a familiar friend. For most of our lives, our addiction was there to comfort us and distract us from our problems. Facing life without acting out involves feelings of grief and loss, but it can be done through faith in a power greater than ourselves and in the company of others who walk the same path. From time to time, we may find ourselves taking back our will, attempting to control things again by only surrendering in certain areas of our lives and not in others. We need not be discouraged by these experiences, as long as we believe in the process of recovery and have the willingness to learn and grow. We can return to step 3 and recommit to our spiritual program. When we make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God of our understanding, we begin to notice signs of growth and transition, evidence that the program is working. We find ourselves being more honest, more willing to share the truth about ourselves with others. We attend meetings consistently, making room in our lives for the fellowship. We ask for and accept help, reaching out to other recovering sex addicts on a regular basis instead of living in secrecy. We may experience abstinence from our inner circle sexual behaviors as a gift from our higher power rather than as a result of our own white-knuckled efforts. We start to value and enjoy a new sense of spirituality. We feel grateful for our recovery and for the gifts we are starting to receive from our higher power. Reflecting on our progress thus far, we may begin to feel both relief and a new faith that the program can work for us. A growing sense of community within SAA fellowship, and a newfound ability to live in the moment under God's care gives us the courage to go forward in recovery. With the help of our sponsor, we are ready to take stock of ourselves, to reflect profoundly on our past and on the defects of character that keep us from fully turning our will and our lives over to the care of God. The decision has been made, and the work of fearless self-exploration can begin. We move on to step 4.